A quiet evening drive turns into an unexpected confrontation. What begins as a routine traffic stop quickly escalates into a tense exchange, where personal assumptions collide with an unshakable truth. An officer confident in his authority faces a man who appears composed but holds far more power than he shows. The encounter unfolds layer by layer, revealing subtle dynamics, raw emotions, and a clash of principles. As tensions rise, you'll find yourself questioning who's really in control. Is it the officer, seeking to assert his authority? Or the driver, silently waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth? Stay with us as we uncover how this pivotal moment transforms not just the people involved, but an entire community's perception of justice and accountability. And if you find this story as compelling as we do, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. The story begins with Michael, a mid-level corporate manager in Sacramento, making his way home after a long day at the office. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting warm hues of gold and orange across the city skyline. Driving his reliable sedan, Michael had the air conditioning turned on just enough to counter the fading summer heat. The car radio played softly in the background, filling the otherwise quiet commute with soothing music. As he approached a busy intersection, the traffic light turned yellow. Michael slowed his vehicle, easing to a halt just as the light turned red. It was then that he noticed the blue and red lights flashing behind him, followed by the sharp sound of a police siren. Michael pulled to the side of the road, his demeanor calm but alert. He glanced into the rearview mirror, where he saw a police officer, young and confident looking, step out of a cruiser and approach his car. The officer, whose name tag read Officer Jackson, was in his mid-30s with a buzz cut and a badge that glinted under the evening sunlight. His posture was assertive, and his voice carried a distinct tone of authority when he asked Michael for his license and registration. Obliging without question, Michael retrieved the requested documents from his glove compartment. His movements were measured, and he maintained a steady, respectful tone, responding politely to Officer Jackson's questions. However, it was quickly apparent that the stop was not just about a minor traffic infraction. Although Officer Jackson initially stated that Michael had failed to stop completely at the light, there was a slight hesitation in his voice, as if he was searching for a reason to extend the interaction. As the officer began probing further, asking questions about Michael's destination and making comments that hinted at assumptions about Michael's background, the tone of the encounter shifted. What began as a routine stop now felt charged with a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. Despite this, Michael remained composed, answering each question calmly and respectfully, his hands resting where the officer could see them. His quiet demeanor and professionalism seemed to unnerve Officer Jackson, who appeared to grow increasingly uncomfortable, yet more determined to assert his authority. Michael's outward poise, however, was not the result of naivete, it was deliberate and measured. He had encountered situations like this before and knew how to handle himself. His calm exterior concealed a mind already assessing the situation, understanding that this was about more than just a traffic violation. In that moment, Michael knew the stop was a test not just for him, but for Officer Jackson. It was a test of how deeply bias and assumptions can influence an encounter. As the sun dipped lower and the evening settled in, Michael's steadiness and composure held firm, creating a tension that lingered in the air. What started as a typical commute had turned into a pivotal moment, one that would set the tone for everything that followed. As the encounter unfolded, Michael's composed demeanor began to subtly shift the dynamics. Officer Jackson, initially brimming with confidence, found himself unsettled by Michael's calm responses. The typical signs of nervousness, fidgeting hands, stammering words were absent. Instead, Michael maintained a steady tone and kept his hands clearly visible on the wheel, answering questions with measured clarity. Jackson leaned closer to the window, as if trying to find something in Michael's expression that might validate his growing suspicion, but he found nothing. Michael, dressed in a crisp shirt and tie after a day at the office, radiated professionalism. You seem pretty relaxed, Jackson remarked, his voice carrying a faint hint of irritation. Most people get a little more worked up when they're pulled over. Michael met the officer's gaze through the open window. Well, officer, I believe in staying calm and cooperating. We all have our jobs to do, right? This response only deepened the unease. Jackson hesitated, as if searching for the next step to regain control of the interaction. Where are you coming from? He asked, the question almost routine but edged with a faint, probing tone. Just heading home after work, Michael replied. Long day at the office, nothing exciting. Jackson shifted his weight, his belt jingling slightly as he adjusted his stance. Do you work in the area? He pressed, as though hoping to trip Michael up. But Michael, unflinching, nodded. Yes, not far from here. The conversation seemed to stall for a moment. Jackson glanced at Michael's license again, then at the registration papers in his hand. His expression, once firm, now held a flicker of uncertainty. Something about Michael's composed, straightforward responses was making the officer second-guess his assumptions. Jackson took a step back, folding the documents as if to buy himself time. Step out of the vehicle for me, Jackson said finally, his tone firm but lacking the earlier confidence. Michael exhaled silently, his hand briefly tightening on the wheel before he released the door latch. He stepped out smoothly, his posture relaxed yet upright. He stood taller than Jackson, his presence unthreatening but quietly commanding. The late sunlight glinted off the polished leather of Michael's shoes, a detail that seemed to catch Jackson's attention. The officer's eyes darted briefly to the tailored lines of Michael's clothes, a stark contrast to the rough image he might have anticipated. Jackson gestured toward the front of the car. Hands where I can see them, he ordered. Michael complied, placing his hands on the hood. The officer began a quick pat-down, his hands moving over pockets and folds of fabric. The process felt more like a performance of authority than a genuine search. Jackson's movements slowed, lingering a bit longer than necessary, as if expecting a reaction. Michael, however, remained composed, showing no signs of agitation. When the search yielded nothing, Jackson stepped back, his jaw tightening. You're clean, he muttered, his voice carrying a trace of begrudging acknowledgement. For a moment, the officer hesitated, as though unsure what to do next. Michael turned to face him, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. So, Officer Jackson, Michael began, his voice steady. Is there anything else you need from me? Jackson blinked, caught off guard by the question's clarity. His posture shifted slightly, and his hand fell away from his belt. No, he replied, his voice lower now. You're free to go. Michael retrieved his documents from Jackson's outstretched hand, his movements deliberate and measured. He returned to his car, pausing for a moment before opening the door. Thank you, officer, he said, his tone polite but resolute. As he slid into the driver's seat and restarted the engine, Jackson stood by the side of the road, watching silently as the sedan pulled away. The encounter had ended without incident, yet the lingering tension was undeniable. Michael's calm response had defused the situation, but it left an impression on Jackson, a seed of doubt about his own approach. The drive home was quiet, the radio still playing softly in the background. Michael's thoughts turned to the deeper issues this interaction represented, the unspoken biases and assumptions that still pervaded many corners of society. It wasn't just about one stop, it was about the bigger picture, and Michael couldn't ignore that. Back home that evening, Michael reflected on the encounter as he sipped a cup of coffee, his mind circling around not just what had happened, but what it meant. He knew he could let it go. After all, there had been no ticket issued, no incident report filed. But Michael also knew this wasn't just about him. It was about the quiet, systemic issues that fueled interactions like the one he'd just experienced. And unlike many others who faced similar situations, Michael had the authority and the responsibility to do something about it. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight streaked across Sacramento, Michael sat at his desk at the Internal Affairs Division. The file on Officer Jackson lay open in front of him. Michael scanned through Jackson's record, noting several past complaints, unprofessional behavior, unnecessary stops, vague allegations that never seemed to go beyond an informal reprimand. None of it was outright egregious, but the pattern was undeniable. It painted a picture of an officer who had grown comfortable operating on assumptions rather than evidence. Michael leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered his options. This was more than a personnel issue. It was a cultural issue, one that couldn't be solved with a single disciplinary action. He wasn't interested in playing the role of a punitive overseer, he wanted to set a precedent. The department needed to see this as a turning point, a moment to re-evaluate not just policies, but the underlying mindset that informed how officers approached their duties. His assistant, Linda, knocked lightly before stepping into his office. She handed him a stack of reports and mentioned that Chief Sanders wanted an update on recent cases. Michael nodded, thanking her, and added, "Linda, could you schedule a meeting with Chief Sanders this afternoon? I need to discuss a departmental review." "Of course," Linda replied, sensing the gravity in his tone. She left the room quietly, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. When Michael sat down with Chief Sanders later that day, he didn't hold back. He recounted the traffic stop in detail, not to point fingers, but to illustrate a larger point. "It's not just about Officer Jackson," he said. "It's about what this pattern of behavior tells us. If we don't address it head on, we're not just failing our officers, we're failing the community." Chief Sanders, a veteran with over 3 decades in the force, listened intently. He was a man known for his no-nonsense approach, and he didn't shy away from tough conversations. "What do you propose?" he asked finally. "A full department review," Michael said without hesitation. "Not just of Jackson's record, but of our training protocols, our reporting structures, and our accountability measures. We need to take a hard look at how we're preparing officers and how we're responding to complaints. If we want to regain trust both internally and with the public, we need to lead by example." Sanders sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You realize this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers." "Good," Michael replied. "It's about time someone did." That marked the start of a process that would take weeks, then months. Michael worked tirelessly, leading a team to review records, interview officers, and consult with community leaders. Public forums were held, giving residents a voice and an opportunity to share their experiences. The case involving Officer Jackson was only the beginning, an initial spark that illuminated a much larger, deeply ingrained problem. Through it all, Michael remained steadfast. He knew real change wouldn't happen overnight. But he also knew that without taking this first step, without confronting the biases and systemic flaws head-on, there could be no progress. As the weeks turned into months, Michael started to see the fruits of his labor: improved training programs, a more transparent complaint process, and a gradual shift in department culture. For Michael, the encounter on the side of the road had become more than a personal moment. It was the catalyst for a new chapter, one in which accountability, fairness, and respect were not just ideals, but the foundation on which the department stood. As the months went on, Michael's efforts began to reshape the department. The review he initiated brought about several notable changes: revised training programs that emphasized de-escalation and unbiased policing, more transparent internal complaint processes, and regular community engagement sessions. Though progress was slow, there was a sense within the department that things were heading in the right direction. Officers were encouraged to think more critically about their actions, and community members started to see signs of genuine accountability. Michael didn't stop there. His work extended beyond the department's walls. He began collaborating with local organizations to create forums where residents could share their experiences and offer feedback on police interactions. By building these bridges, Michael hoped to foster a culture of mutual respect and understanding. He believed that change wouldn't come solely from within the police force, it also needed the support and trust of the public. Through his leadership, the department started to repair the fractured relationship with the community it served. Meanwhile, Officer Jackson's case remained a point of discussion. While some within the department saw him as an example of what needed to change, others viewed him as a scapegoat. Michael knew that systemic reform wasn't about vilifying individuals, but about creating a culture where officers held each other accountable. He worked closely with the leadership team to ensure that new policies weren't just words on paper, but were actually followed through with meaningful action. One of the most significant reforms Michael championed was the introduction of body-worn cameras and a strict policy of review for all traffic stops. This measure was met with some resistance at first, but over time, it became clear that the cameras served as a protective measure for both officers and civilians. The transparency helped de-escalate conflicts before they could escalate, and it provided an invaluable tool for training and oversight. Michael's approach wasn't without challenges. He faced criticism from some officers who were resistant to change and from community members who were skeptical that the reforms would last. Despite this, Michael remained steadfast. He made it clear that his goal was not to single out individuals, but to ensure that the entire department held itself to a higher standard. His patience and persistence slowly started to pay off. Over time, there were fewer complaints of misconduct, and more community members reported positive interactions with officers. One of the defining moments of this new chapter came during a town hall meeting where residents and officers spoke openly about their experiences. Michael listened as both sides voiced their concerns. One resident, an elderly woman named Mrs. Green, shared how she had once feared calling the police for help. Now, she said, she felt safer because she believed the department was genuinely listening. Michael's efforts had begun to break down barriers, replacing fear and mistrust with cautious optimism. Looking back on that initial traffic stop, Michael understood that it was a turning point not just for him, but for the entire department. By addressing the underlying issues that had allowed problems to fester, he helped chart a new path forward. It wasn't perfect, and the work wasn't finished, but it was a start, one that had already made a tangible difference in how the community and the department viewed one another. For Michael, that was reason enough to keep pushing forward. Months passed, and Michael's reforms continued to ripple through the department. The culture began to shift slowly, but noticeably. Officers were more mindful of their interactions with the public, and the community started to respond in kind. Michael wasn't naive, he knew there would always be challenges. Change never came easy, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. But what mattered to him was that the foundation was being laid for something better, something that could be sustained over the long haul. One particular incident stood out during this time, an encounter that reinforced the importance of the work Michael had been doing. A new officer, just a few weeks out of training, stopped a young man for a broken tail light. In the past, such a stop might have led to unnecessary tension or escalation, but now, thanks to Michael's reforms, the outcome was different. The officer remained respectful, calmly explaining the reason for the stop and even offering to help the young man find a nearby auto shop. Word of the encounter spread, and it became a positive example within the department of how respectful policing could lead to better relationships with the community. Michael made a point of meeting with the officer afterward. "This is what it's all about," he said. "Not just following procedure, but truly serving the community. You're setting an example for others to follow." The officer, clearly proud of how he handled the situation, nodded. "I'm just doing my job, sir," he replied. But both of them knew it was more than that, it was a step toward a new normal. Outside of the department, Michael continued to engage with local leaders and advocacy groups. He worked with neighborhood associations to create public safety forums where residents and officers could talk openly about their concerns and expectations. These events weren't always comfortable, but Michael believed that the only way to move forward was to confront difficult truths head-on. Over time, trust began to build. While not every resident walked away convinced, many left feeling heard and respected, something that had been sorely lacking in the past. Amid these efforts, Officer Jackson's case reached its conclusion. After his suspension, Jackson went through additional training and a rigorous evaluation process. Michael had made it clear from the start that this wasn't about retribution, it was about ensuring every officer was prepared to uphold the values of the department. When Jackson returned to duty, he did so with a different perspective. He became a quieter presence, more deliberate in his actions, and noticeably more respectful during his interactions. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was a sign that change was possible, even for those who had resisted it initially. For Michael, seeing these incremental improvements reaffirmed his belief in the process. He knew that the road ahead was still long and full of obstacles, but the progress they had made was undeniable. The department was no longer the same one he had joined years ago. It was evolving, not just in policy and procedure, but in mindset and culture. And while Michael understood that there was no finish line in this work, he took pride in knowing that the legacy he was building was one of integrity, accountability, and a genuine commitment to serving the community. By the following spring, the department was beginning to see the lasting effects of the reforms Michael had championed. Monthly training sessions focused on de-escalation, community engagement, and implicit bias awareness had become standard practice. The department's leadership team met regularly to review policies, ensuring that changes weren't just implemented but maintained and improved upon. Though there was still work to be done, the progress was undeniable. Michael often reflected on how far they had come, not with self-congratulation, but with a firm resolve to keep pushing forward. One of the most encouraging developments was the shift in how officers viewed their responsibilities. What used to be a rigid us versus them mentality had started to give way to a more collaborative approach. Officers were beginning to see themselves as part of the community, not separate from it. On their patrols, they took more time to engage with residents, answering questions, offering assistance, and simply having conversations. The department began to track positive interactions as carefully as it did complaints, and the numbers showed a steady increase in public trust. In addition to these internal changes, Michael worked closely with local organizations to launch a mentoring program for at-risk youth. The program paired officers with young people from underserved neighborhoods, creating a rare opportunity for positive relationships to form. The initial skepticism from both sides gave way to mutual respect as the officers and their mentor found common ground. For Michael, this was a small but meaningful step toward breaking the cycle of distrust that had persisted for so long. Not every day was smooth. There were still tough calls, difficult cases, and moments of doubt. Some officers resisted the changes, grumbling that things had been fine before Michael's reforms. But gradually, even the skeptics had to acknowledge the results: fewer complaints of misconduct, more open communication between officers and residents, and a growing sense of pride in wearing the badge. Michael stayed focused on the bigger picture, knowing that the incremental progress they were making was laying the foundation for a more just and accountable department. As summer approached, Michael attended a community event at a local park, one of many he had helped organize over the past year. Residents, officers, and city officials gathered to celebrate the improved relationship between the department and the community. Michael took the stage, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "This isn't about one policy or one program," he said, addressing the crowd. "It's about a commitment to do better every single day. It's about understanding that respect and accountability go hand in hand. And it's about proving that we can serve and protect with integrity." The applause that followed was heartfelt, but Michael didn't linger on it. For him, the work was ongoing. As the event wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Michael walked through the park, speaking with residents, shaking hands, and listening to their thoughts. He understood that trust was something that had to be earned continually. Each conversation, each interaction was another step forward, another building block in the community's relationship with its police department. Looking back on the month since that initial traffic stop, Michael felt a deep sense of purpose. The journey had been difficult, but it was worth every challenge. The department was far from perfect, but it was better. It was moving in the right direction. For Michael, that was more than enough reason to keep pushing, keep listening, and keep striving to build the kind of department the community could truly believe in. By the end of the year, the work Michael and his team had done was beginning to resonate well beyond the department's walls. Other city agencies, noticing the positive shift in community sentiment, started reaching out to learn from Michael's approach. Even neighboring law enforcement organizations began implementing similar training programs and accountability measures, inspired by the tangible improvements in Sacramento. For Michael, it wasn't about gaining recognition, it was about sustaining progress. He regularly attended city council meetings, ensuring that funding for officer training and community outreach remained a priority. He also maintained an open-door policy, encouraging both officers and residents to share their concerns directly with him. This transparency, coupled with his consistent follow-through, strengthened his reputation as a leader who not only listened but acted. A particularly memorable moment came during a public safety town hall. A young man named Jordan, someone who had once been wary of police, stood up to speak. "I used to feel like the cops were only here to keep me down," Jordan said, his voice steady. "But now, I see them walking through my neighborhood, talking to people, and actually helping. That change didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen on its own. Mr. Carter, I just wanted to thank you for proving that things really can get better." Michael, humbled, nodded and thanked Jordan, reflecting again on the journey they had all been through. Within the department, Michael continued to push for meaningful reforms. He worked on refining the officer evaluation process, making it more focused on community feedback and de-escalation success rather than just arrest numbers or citations issued. He also partnered with a local university to start a leadership development program for officers, aiming to foster a new generation of police leaders who understood the importance of integrity and service. Despite the progress, challenges still arose. There were occasional flare-ups of mistrust in certain neighborhoods, and not every officer embraced the new way of thinking. Yet Michael never wavered. When faced with resistance, he engaged in honest, direct conversations. He reminded everyone, officers, city officials, and residents, that true change was hard but worth it. Every small victory, every positive encounter, was another step toward a department that truly served the people. By the close of the year, statistics showed a significant decrease in complaints against officers. More importantly, there was a noticeable uptick in positive community interactions. These weren't just numbers on a report, they were stories of officers helping residents in need, of residents speaking warmly about their experiences with law enforcement, and of a city beginning to heal long-standing wounds. As Michael walked into the new year, he carried with him the lessons of the past months. The work was far from over, but the foundation was strong. The trust they had rebuilt was fragile, yet it was growing. And for Michael, that was enough reason to keep showing up every day, ready to do the work, ready to listen, and ready to prove that a department could truly embody its motto, to protect and serve with integrity and respect. The heart of this story reminds us that progress starts with accountability and respect. For older Americans, who have witnessed decades of societal change, it's a powerful affirmation that individual efforts can ripple outward. The department's transformation didn't happen overnight. It required one person's determination to lead with integrity and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In our own lives, this lesson applies every day. Whether we're resolving a family dispute, volunteering in the community, or advocating for fair treatment, the principles of respect, active listening, and follow-through remain essential. We also see that change often comes in small, steady steps. For seniors, this is a reassuring message. Age and experience position us to be the patient, consistent voices of reason. By staying engaged, by mentoring others, by fostering dialogue rather than division, we can contribute to a legacy of fairness and understanding. The story teaches that no matter our age or role, we have the capacity to inspire trust, lead by example, and build stronger, more respectful communities one thoughtful action at a time.